Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to June on the Range. And it's nearing the end of the month. It's getting very close. I have one more video after this, but this is a wrap up of the Clifford Simak Western stories. And I've now, at the end of this video, 12 of them will be dealt with. The other two that are known have not been reprinted yet in the complete short fiction of Clifford Simak. Still waiting for volume 13 and 14 to come out. But this week was one in volume 3. It's the Ghost of a Model T and Other Stories. And the story is... let's see, where is here? No More Hides and Tallow. That was published in the March 1946 issue of Lariat Story Magazine. And again, it's difficult to find out what the original name was for this, because the editor talks about his journals being incomplete, but also not always saying that, what it was published at. He may have said he sent in a story called X. He got X amount of dollars for it, but then you have to try to match that up because they always change the name. Now, this one has a brief sort of appearance of a native North American, an Indian. It's the only one. I don't think there's any in the other two stories, but the only one out of the 12 stories that I've read. And he's treated fairly well, like, in a sense. Well, he's a bad guy, but he's an equal with the other bad guys. And it's called No More Hides and Tallow. It's about Lieutenant Ned Benton, who is coming home after the Civil War. He's from Texas, so he was a Confederate soldier, a Confederate lieutenant, and he's looking forward to going home to his ranch and build things up, because during the war, shortly after, things were very difficult. Nobody wanted cattle, and the title sort of fits in, No More Hides and Tallow, that, in order to just subsist on, instead of starving, they would have to slaughter the cattle, take the tallow and the hides, and leave the meat and everything, the carcasses, to rot. But things are starting to change now. Out west and other places, they want beef. So Texas is sort of set. The ranchers are set again to start selling, but they got to take them on cattle drives, the cattle trail to the depots at the trains, the railway. So, but he wants to go back. This has sort of kept him going, his dream, in a sense, to come back home. And he comes back home to find out that his mother is ill. She's ill in bed. But also to find out that the family no longer has the ranch. They only have 10 acres, the house, because the bank was going under and called in everybody's loans. And then what happened was a larger rancher bought everything up. So he thinks there's something fishy. His parents think that, they were lucky that this rancher, Watson, was very nice to them and allowing them to keep their house and 10 acres. But Ned Benton thinks there's something fishy there, and he finds out that there is. There's others that are in the same situation, and now, because everything is set to start selling beef and meat, he's going to cash in. So he's going to stop this, or try to stop this. And his sweetheart that he had wound up marrying the son of this Watson, the big landowner now. But he goes head to head with him, and finds out that the banker in him sort of uh, created all this situation to sell everything off, or to foreclose on people. And so he gets them, in other words, dead to rights for this. So there's gunfights, there's fist fights, the whole thing. Something I'm going to talk about is the sound of a gun going off, but I'll wait till I'll do that sort of at the end. But yeah, it's actually a really good. I enjoyed this one. I think this was one of his better ones for written wise. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, and I think the writing was quite good for this as well. Like there's the cliches throughout it that you're going to get, but I did thoroughly enjoy it. And the second one that I read was from Volume 7, "The Death in the House and Other Stories," and that was "When It's Hangnoose Time in Hell." This one was published in April 1946 in 44. I'm assuming. I never really actually verified this, but I'm assuming it's .44 Western magazine, so it's 44 caliber Western magazine. I'm assuming that's how it was called. But yeah, so that's April 1946, and he in 1946 he was paid like $60 for a story and 160 for a story. So it could be one or the other for this. Well, it was $60 in 1943, and then he sold in 1946 160. So price has gone up. This one is a little different. It's about a riverboat gambler who is sort of realizing that it's coming to the end of their days. The riverboats or gambling is. So him and a friend were thinking of setting up and doing something else on the land. So he looks into this, but there's a corrupt. Well, it's the same story. Corrupt. So they've killed number of people to get their the money, all sorts of things like this. And so he goes head to head with them, toe to toe, and exposes them, and and then it realizes that this may not be good for me, but I'll go back to the river. But he does stay because they want him to, the town, after he sort of gets rid of the bad guys, he stays. I didn't enjoy this one as much, even though I kind of liked the idea of it being a riverboat or a gambler, because this is prior to the TV series Maverick with that was on in the 50s that I really enjoyed. Not watching it then, but in reruns. So that one was good. And the last one is in the Volume 1. I Am Crying All Inside and Other Stories. Now, this one is a very short one. It's Gunsmoke Interlude. And it happens to be the last story that was published, or the last known Western. And this was published in 1952 for 10 short story Western magazine, 1952. It probably was written before that, because there's evidence to show that he'd sold stories, and some never actually got published. But this one must have got published. They might have had a space for it, because it's very short. It's about 7 or 8 pages long, and it's about a sort of a gunslinger, or he clearly has stolen money, either from train heist or banks or whatever. But he's heading out to Mexico and he's got $100,000 in Mexico that he's going to change his life with, and he's just one day ahead of somebody that's after him for the price on his head of $10,000. So he winds up in this town. His horse is, basically had it. He needs a new horse and he needs some rest. So he decides that he'll take the day. It's in the morning. He'll take the day to rest, and then he'll light out again in the evening. And so he goes into the saloon. He gets the room, and the sheriff comes. A real, they calls him a kid, a young sheriff, who says, you've got to, give your guns in or something like that. I'll give you to sort of sundown to do this, and then otherwise you're coming out, and we're gonna, face off in the town. So he rests, he has breakfast, he drinks a little bit, and he sleeps for most of the day. And he's not going to give up his guns. Why he doesn't just go to the sheriff and say, I'm leaving now, so I don't need to do this, bye. I'm not quite sure, but okay. He writes a letter to his sister, basically saying that he's heading out to check a few things in Mexico, and he's thinking too that because his sister's had well, she was in love with somebody who'd gone out west to sort of make his fortune in a sense, and he says he'd never seen him, but he obviously doesn't know this person by sight. And it turns out, so he writes this letter, he puts some money into the envelope, and it gets mailed off. And then he's going to, face off with the sheriff out on the main street for a gunfight. Because he's got to get out of there, he figures, before the other guy that's after him. And he just sort of thinks, oh, it'd be a shame to kill this kid, but what can he do? He's not going to give up the guns. But, then he finds out the name of the sheriff is his sister's boyfriend or whatever that she's in love with. So it basically, he goes out and says, well, the guy's after him for 10, he can't kill this guy. So he basically ends, the story ends with him thinking, well, $10,000 for the reward, which they'll find out is a good start for him in life. So in other words, he's going to allow himself to be shot and killed, so his sister can get or her sister's potential partner is going to get the reward, and that's where it ends. It's fairly weak. And as I say, it's his last story that was published, but I can't believe it's the last story that he wrote, because it's more like one of the very first one he wrote too that wasn't that good. But it is about redemption. Like, he's trying to redeem himself, with the sister, and turn her over a new leaf with the money in Mexico. But it's not going to happen. It's almost like a noir in a sense. You can't escape your past, regardless of what you do. But I've enjoyed these westerns for the most part, by Clifford Simak. I will be rereading them at some point and looking a little closer at them. But the one thing I noticed, I should have kept a running tally of what the what he uses, the terms he uses for the sound of a gun. There's barking, there's talking, there's grumbling, there is coughing, there is hacking cough. It just goes on. Thunder, and also bullets whizzing by, whispering, pinging by, and all these words. Like, I bet there's a whole page full, like one in each line, if you went through in one story, and he just throw these out there, the terms out there. And I kind of wonder if this was typical of the stories at the time, because I've never really I've read novels from, and probably some short stories from the Western magazines. I've definitely read novels that have been put into that were serialized there, and I've read some short stories, Western short stories in the past, which I'm sure were within some of the magazines, but this is probably the most I've read from magazines, because this was 12 short stories. knowing that especially knowing specifically what magazines they were from. And but as I said in a previous one, that there could be something like 21 possible Western stories out there, because Dave Wixon, the editor, has painstakingly gone through the journals and all the entries, and there's potential. Some of them, would have had different names. There could still be out there published, but he's not been able to locate any yet, or at least up at the time of these were published. Or they were bought, like he thinks that some were bought and never published, and that's why this one may have been held back for even 5 years, and they just decided to put it in because they had a bit of space. So there could be other ones out there in files of, if there's still files available of these publishers, or if they were sent back, like, well, obviously they were sent back. Clifford Simak never kept them, or they got lost. But this was mostly in the 40s, and it looks like that there was times when he needed some extra money. Science fiction wasn't selling well, so he tried this. He didn't like doing it because he thought they were just all the same, and he actually tried to write at least one Western story in 1933, and it was rejected. But he probably tried other ones also, but none, as far as is known, none were published, as well as other kind of things. And this was, like, obviously during the Depression, and it's also a period where he got like 5 stories published by like 1932, 33. But and then he didn't have anything published again other than The Creator, which is a science fiction sort of novelette, in Marvel Tales, which was a semi-professional magazine, until John W. Campbell took over editorship of Astounding in, late 1937, but his first, I think, was somewhere at the beginning of its first name as editor came out in early 38. So he began writing again there. So, but the story is that he just stopped writing. Well, he didn't. He kept writing, but he couldn't get really much. Like, there were hardly any magazines. There was basically just 3, and it's Depression. Some of them went on hiatus or went from monthly to every 2 months, or they're on hiatus because they just couldn't continue. So anyway, and it's an interesting thing because a lot of writers wrote over different genres, and I'm sure there's I don't know off the top of my head other science fiction writers that wrote Richard Matheson, but Richard Matheson wrote across the board, but he's obviously later. But yeah, these were good. These are expensive. They're print on demand. They are expensive to get in hard copy, but you can buy them a little cheaper as ebooks. I've got 9 of these in hard copy, and just this year, at the beginning of this year, the last 4. 9, 10, 11, 9, no, I got 8. Sorry, so 9, 10, 11, and 12 has come out as a hard copy. So fingers crossed the last 2 will come out eventually. And maybe even by that time, there might be a few new things in there. Anyway, how has your June on the Range going, if you've been following this through? I'd love to hear. Do sound out in the comments. And I'll be back I'll be back tomorrow with my final June on the Range, and probably tack on a roundup, sort of June on the Range roundup at the end. So anyway, take care, BookTube. Talk to you soon.